Hey folks, and welcome to part 5 of the in-depth analysis of The Last of Us. In this episode, we're going to be taking a closer look at the various characters. We'll be talking about who they are, what they do, how they develop, as well as their relationship to the other characters. Sometimes these relationships may be indirect, as in the characters never actually meet. However, I believe that there are some parallels to be drawn between various characters, even though they might not be that obvious at first. We will be talking about them in no particular order, although we will save Joel and Ellie for last. Also, please note that this video assumes that you're familiar with the story in its entirety, as in the spoilers in this video are going to be many and, well, major. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the first character we see in-game, Sarah. For obvious reasons, we don't get that much time to get to know Sarah. However, I still think that there are some things worthy of noting. First and foremost, we can conclude that she actually cares a lot about her father. Not only did she get what we can only assume is a fairly expensive watch for him for his birthday, but she also decided to stay up late at night in order to be able to give it to him in person. Her and Joel also seem to be having a healthy and good relationship. This despite her being in her teens, the time where most kids usually rebel against their parents. Once the outbreak hits, we learn that Sarah really wants to be brave. With everything going on around her, she still tries to maintain her composure, even though she is still looking for Joel. Although we also see that this whole situation might be a bit too much for her. When Joel is forced to shoot the neighbor, she is clearly shaken. Not only did she see a man get shot, but she also saw her father pull the trigger. Quite a bit to take in for someone so young, to say the least. As they're driving along with Tommy, Joel does his best to keep Sarah calm, although it's obvious that she's still very much concerned. She asks how many people are dead or if they are sick, but Joel does everything in his power to make sure that she doesn't hear anything bothersome. When they drive past the family and Joel tells Tommy not to stop, Sarah is clearly bothered. She says with a low voice that we should have helped them. Neither of the brothers even acknowledge it. Once they're hit by the car, Sarah is completely at the mercy of her surroundings. At this point, she seems to have given up trying to be brave, as she appears utterly terrified. And in the end, she's completely helpless, as her life seems to be in the hands of everyone but her. And tragically, it's in this helpless state that her life ends. As I said, we don't have that much time to get to know her. Although I would say it's remarkable how much we come to care about her in such a short period of time. I think that's because she's presented as a very sympathetic girl, as well as her being very easily to identify with given the circumstances. Her death also presents us with a very hopeless situation, both for us and for Joel. There simply is no safety, not from the fungus or the people who are supposedly there to protect. So in summary, even though she's not around for long, Sarah's character is used to absolute maximum efficiency. Now let's talk about the man who ensured that Sarah's dad did not die along with her, Tommy. Compared to Joel, Tommy seems a whole lot more sympathetic and optimistic. The sympathetic part is very obvious very early on. We again come back to the part where they're trying to escape the infection and drive past the family. Tommy's first instinct is to stop to see what they need. Joel, on the other hand, tells him very firmly to keep driving. In this situation, Tommy seems to go into a bit of a big brother knows best kind of mode, as he barely even bothers to argue against Joel on this issue. You can also see his sympathetic side when he tries to give Joel the photograph of him and Sarah. Tommy wants to do Joel a favor, as he believes that this photo will give him some comfort. Joel, however, dismisses it completely. I would say that this, if anything, shows the difference in philosophy between the two brothers. Regarding the optimism, Tommy seems convinced that despite the fungus, there is a way to make the world a better place. How he goes about trying to achieve that, though, shifts a bit. First he hung out with Joel, then he was a firefly, and now he's with Maria. Unlike Joel, Tommy is very erratic in what he wants to do. Whereas Joel seemed quite depressed and seemed content to remain quite stationary, Tommy was moving around looking for a cause to throw his full weight behind. He tried it with Joel, but that obviously didn't work out. Then there were the fireflies, but he didn't seem particularly satisfied with their cause either. And now he's with Maria's group, and honestly this seems to be his best bet yet. I think this faction hopping seems to indicate that Tommy is more angry than bitter at the whole situation. He wants one big, drastic solution that would restore the world to what it was. In that sense, he's not that dissimilar from an angry revolutionary. However, this also ties into what I perceive to be his optimistic side. He really does believe that the world can be changed back to the way it was. I believe that this is his reason for survival, an unyielding hope that he will one day be able to return to the life he had. And now with Maria, this is as close as he's ever gotten to that dream. Which is also why he seems very unwilling to let it go when Joel asks him to take Ellie off his hands. However, this is where all three attributes that I've mentioned come into play. He is sympathetic to Joel's cause, feeling like he can't leave his brother in need. His optimism also lets him hope that with Ellie they might be able to actually find a vaccine. And finally, he still has a tremendous respect for Joel and possibly feels like he owes him something. When Maria protests to him supposedly leaving, he even says things like, "I can't have this hanging over my head," and "I have to do this." I would argue the contrary, he really doesn't have to do this. However, I think he actually feels that he has an obligation to do this, an obligation to Joel, himself, and the whole world. While he's not super fleshed out, I gotta say, I really like Tommy. As a little brother myself, I can very much sympathize with the way he thinks and many of the actions he takes. I also find it interesting how he's constantly balancing between being absolutely loyal to Joel and rebelling against him. In the beginning of the game, we see him shoot a soldier in order to protect his brother, but later he makes a threat on his life if he should as much as touch him. I think any baby brother or sister can relate very much to this balance of emotions you have towards your older sibling, and I think they pull it off really well. So overall, with all this in mind, I would say that Tommy is a very believable and relatable character. And unlike many other sibling characters in other games, he actually contributes to the story. Whilst on the subject of Tommy, let's talk about his wife, Maria. I think we can conclude that she must be a very strong and driven leader. I say this because she has created one of the safest and most habitable areas to live in the whole country. She obviously cares a lot for Tommy as well, and the life they built together. When Tommy says that he has to leave to bring Ellie to the Fireflies, Maria says that she's terrified that she will end up a widow. At the same time, she realizes that this is something he feels that he has to do. Though she makes it very clear to both Tommy and Joel that she's not happy with it. Unfortunately, that is pretty much all we know about her. In my opinion, she's one of the most underutilized characters in the entire game. I'm interested to know how she came to lead the group and what kind of leader she is. How's she compared to the other faction leaders of the game? And I'm also curious to go deeper to find out what kind of person she is. However, she's presented as little more than a faction leader and Tommy's wife. I'm truly curious about her, but unfortunately we don't get a whole lot to work with, making her the only character I would regard as filler. From one faction head to another, let's talk about Marlene. Marlene is a faction leader on her last leg. It's quite obvious that the Fireflies have not become what she hoped they would be. During the game's intro, you can hear her talk using grand phrases and big sweeping ideas, even going as far as to say, "When lost in the darkness, look for the light." I believe that somewhere along the line she had a vision of them being the unambiguously loved liberators, heroes of the people. Obviously though, the turnout was not quite as great as she had hoped. And now they've more or less been reduced to a guerrilla unit, fighting a losing war against the military. At this point, Marlene just seems really tired and fed up with the situation. When Joel teases her about her group being easily provoked, she barely bothers to respond. She is, however, clearly convinced that Ellie is the key to finding the cure, which is why she becomes so invested in this quest. She might be thinking that if this succeeds, then this whole ordeal might have been worth something in the end. When we reach the end of the game and find her diary, we realize that Marlene has basically gone through an existential crisis as the story has progressed. She thinks that Ellie was lost when the team at the Capitol building was wiped out, and now she feels so guilty. She feels that she is responsible for losing the potential key to creating the vaccine. And even though no other group member says anything to her, she still feels their judging stares. When you read this, you get the feeling that she's just hours away from calling it a day for good. When they find Ellie again, however, she's absolutely over the moon. And this is where I think she gets a bit of tunnel vision. As I've discussed before, after she takes the decision to do the surgery on Ellie, she doesn't want to be confronted with this in any way, shape or form. She just has one thing on her mind: all of this has to be worth something, all the pain that she's gone through to reach this point. She is, however, convinced that sacrificing Ellie is the right choice, and she's apparently also convinced that everybody else sees it like that too. She tries to convince Joel of this, believing that he will understand the weight of this decision. When that doesn't work, apparently she believes that she can still convince him given a second chance. And as we know, that didn't go too well either. In this situation, I would say that her greatest strength is also her greatest weakness, that being her determination. It's this determination that made her the leader she is now. She was determined that the Fireflies would be a force for good in the world, no matter the cost. And in fact, she's so determined and convinced that she seems to be having a hard time figuring out how anybody could possibly disagree with her. We also see that she's very loyal, at least to certain people, particularly Ellie's mother, Anna. She promised she would take care of Ellie, and she has pretty much raised her. which is of course why the decision to sacrifice Ellie is made even harder. However, despite her determination, it's obvious that this decision is gnawing at her conscience, and she would rather not deal with that. As I said in my ending video, she keeps going on and on about how this is what Ellie would have wanted. However, she does not seem particularly keen on waiting for Ellie to wake up so they can have a talk about it. She has made her decision, and she does not want anything that would come in and shake her determination. She does not want to repeat the thought process that brought her to the conclusion that they must do the operation. And in the end, her greatest failing was believing that she could convince anyone to see things her way, which resulted in Joel killing her. If I was asked to summarize, I would call her tragically flawed. A determined, driven, and loyal woman, who in the end became the victim of her own convictions. Let's continue this theme of faction leaders and talk about the dark counterpart to both Maria and Marlene, David. When it comes down to it, David is basically an evil Maria. They both lead a group and do what they can to make them as comfortable as possible. The key difference is that David does not operate within moral boundaries. Deception, murder, cannibalism, nothing is off the table so long as he perceives that it helps the group. There is, however, another major difference between David and Maria and Marlene. That is that David will sometimes put his own needs and desires ahead of those of the group. For example, he tries to court Ellie, even as James, a member of his group, says that the others will not be particularly pleased with this. But David is hellbent on getting close to Ellie, even if this means that the group loses resources and he loses respect. Speaking of which, at first glance it's a bit tricky to determine whether or not David is actually offering to protect Ellie. However, from what I can see, it seems more like he was trying to make her suffer from Stockholm Syndrome. He wanted her to be reliant on him, so that she would not leave him. Why he wanted to keep her around is up for speculation, although there are some disturbing implications. Primarily what's implied by the man that Joel interrogates in order to learn Ellie's location. He says that Ellie is David's latest pet. There are a few ways to interpret this. It could be that David likes to keep youngsters around so he can psychologically manipulate them, as he tries to do with Ellie. The even darker implication, however, is that David could have wanted to keep her around in order to sexually abuse her. We don't have any real concrete evidence one way or the other, but there is one more hint when they're fighting it out in the restaurant. That is when David says, "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Which, yeah, the implications are disturbing either way you look at it. It seems to me that David really works hard to suppress his more psychotic nature. He's all nice and friendly and tries to act normal until you turn on him. Then he becomes very menacing very quickly. In his calmer moments, however, he still tries to rationalize some of the more barbaric things he's done, like, say, cannibalism. Also, either he's being dishonest with Ellie, or he has completely lost control over his men. He says that he had sent people to look for food when they encountered Joel, and that Joel was the crazy one killing them left and right. However, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems more like a scavenge and kill mission than anything else. However, given what David is trying to accomplish with Ellie, it's highly possible that he's just lying. And finally, in the end, he doesn't seem to care about anything other than killing Ellie. Even going as far as to lock himself in a burning building. I think it's safe to say that at this point, he has abandoned everything, including his group. Killing and vengeance is all he can think about now. I'd say that David makes for a great antagonist. He is indeed the living embodiment of what humans are capable of doing when pressed hard enough, as well as a demonstration of what happens when someone who is not mentally stable assumes command. The way he is presented, David truly represents some of the darkest sides of humanity.
How did you put it? Tiny pieces. See you in the morning, Ellie.
Thank you for watching part 5 of my in-depth analysis of The Last of Us. Next time we're gonna continue our discussion of the various characters, as, once again, I'm incapable of keeping things short. If you enjoyed this video, you're more than welcome to leave a thumbs up. And if you like the kind of videos I'm making and you want to see more of them, then you can always subscribe. Also, if you have any comments on how these videos could be improved, then please leave it in the comment section. I am always looking for feedback to try to make my videos as sharp as possible. And finally, if you want to keep up with what I'm doing and how the next video is coming along, then you can always follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, it really does mean a lot to me. Take care, and I hope to catch you later.